Hello and welcome to Workout Wednesday for Power BI 2024 week 41. This week we're having a little fun with animation to visualize a drag race. A drag race is a race where cars just go straight across for about a quarter mile or so, sometimes an eighth of a mile, I think. So that is what we are going to make today. There are a couple different approaches to this, but I ended up using Deneb mostly because it cuts down on the blinking when we watch the report and the cars move compared to some of the other ways I got to it. This is my example end result. I play the fun start sound, I click the go button, and we watch the cars go across. We can see a couple of them are stragglers at the end. We can make it stop. You'll notice the winners are denoted by stars. And they have a nice background that looks kind of like a racetrack. So let's get started. I'm going to first go get my data. And it came from this NHRA website. It does take a couple seconds for it to load here in Power Query. Then we can make sure that we have the correct table. Yes, that is it. So I'm going to choose Transform Data. I don't need the rows that have these comments about whether or their cars are driving. I'm just keeping those. And now that I just have those, I can promote my first row to headers. So now it's lane, driver, car, queue position, all that. Now that my headers are promoted, I can filter out the rows that say lane because they're just additional column headers from the way it was spread out in the source HTML. And I'll just go through and make sure I have okay data types. This one is a whole number. This one is decimal, not fixed decimal. Next, I can add a custom column. I'm going to call it winner. And I will make it a true false type. So what this does is the way they denoted the winners was they put win at the end of the driver name. So I'm just looking at the end of the driver name to see if the last 3 characters are win. And now that I've done that, I can take out the win from everybody's name and just let them be the correct driver name. And then I have a couple of columns I'm not using. Qualifying position, reaction time, move and first, move and first. Then I'm just going to add an index column. So I have 16 different drivers. And the way this data is situated is these first 2 went head to head, the second 2 went head to head, the third set of 2 went head to head. And this is my staging table, base table, whatever you'd like to call it. I'm actually going to make some other tables off of that. So let me reference and call this one race car. And I'm just going to get the distance measurements out of here. This one is distance timing, and I'm going to remove basically the opposite columns. But leave the index. That's now my unique ID for the driver in this race. Oh, need to remove that one as well. So there's my distance timings, but they're in columns instead of rows. So I'm going to unpivot my other columns. So now I have 4 measurements per car. There's one for 60, 330, 660 feet, and then the total time. So for every time I have feet, I'm just going to get rid of that to turn it into a number. And then ET, I had to go look this up. You might not. I wouldn't expect you to know this off the top of your head. Is 1320 feet. That's how long the race is. So now I have my distance correctly denoted in the attribute. And then I did something just to help myself out from a visualization standpoint. I made a table that had zeros for the time and the distance because I didn't have this in the results, so that way I can visualize my cars at the starting line. So now that I have that, I can append. So I have all my results and then I have my zeros. And I can disable the load on that one. Oh, I need to change that to a decimal number. And then I decided for visualization purposes to round this. So that it just has one digit after the decimal. And just made it easier that way. I'm sure there are ways we could bin this and not do that, but I have no requirement to be that exact. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to add one more table for my buttons, my stop and go buttons. And then I had a bonus option in this challenge to add an audio player. So that requires another table in here. And you can see these are pointing to MP3s that I downloaded, I believe from Pixabay or somewhere. That information is over in GitHub. And I had two sounds, but you really only see one at the beginning. I ended up not using the other right away in an obvious way. This is going to be sounds. And that is it for Power Query. Again, there's something about the source website that makes this go a little slowly. Just give it a bit, it should work. And you didn't have to choose the same race I chose. You can choose whatever race you want. It just may affect a couple of things like how many 0 rows you add to make all your cars start at the starting line. And then there's one calculation that would deal with how the longest amount of time it took someone to finish the race, which could vary by race. So we'll let that finish. Okay. Now I've got a couple of tables to add. I did this one in Dex just because I was testing it. You can do this in Power Query. I'm putting it here because it's actually easier to read in this box. So I made a table that was lane, image URL, and image B64. On the side, converted my race car, my blue and orange race car images into the base 64 image. You prefix it with the string, and then you follow it with your base 64. So there was a left one, there's the right one. That made a table. I need to add a column because I had 2 rows for my audio instead of 1. This was a column. This could have been a measure if you only had 1 row. So again, it's referring back to the sound that is in my GitHub account. Add a couple measures. That's for conditional formatting of colors. In my title inside of my report, I used little flag images. Those were SVGs. So I'm making them here as measures. And they need their Data category assigned. I did my title using the HTML content light visual. So this is putting together my two images and my text. Okay, to make this work appropriately, I ended up using a parameter. So this parameter I called timesex. It's a decimal that goes from 0 to 8, but it increments by 0.1. And that is what fixes my race car. All right. Let's review the DAX real quick. We looked at the button. This is just for conditional formatting. If the button is go, it should be green. If not, it should be this shade of red. My left flag is just an SVG that has been pasted in. My right flag, same thing. My title combines the left flag with some text in the right flag. I needed to denote where the end of the track was to use it for plotting a marker. And so I said that that was 1330 for that purpose. And then this is how I figure out what distance the cars are at various times. So it was erroring because I needed to have my parameter there first. So whatever parameter is chosen there, figure out the max timesex from the distance timing tables for any car where the timesex is less than whatever this value is, and then filter all the time seconds value so that they are less than the last visible time that we just calculated, and then give me the max distance with that filter applied to the table. So it's kind of a weird semi-additive measure type thing. And then I wanted to calculate each car's total time for the race. So as long as we're looking at one race car, get the max time seconds value for all time seconds values. But again, this will have a filter context of a single race car. For the race car, I just did a quick measure so that if they were a winner and the car was currently located at the end of the race, they would get a little star. Otherwise, they don't get anything. This is the HTML that creates an audio control. This is what sound it actually plays if you want to get fancy and be dynamic. And again, that's just my parameter. Once you create it, you'll see it's generate series from 0 to 8, just like we said. Now I need to go get some custom visuals. I'm going to get Deneb. I'm going to get HTML. I think I did regular for this one. All right, let's get started. I'm going to paste my text boxes because those are not special. So I'm going to change my font. I want everything to be trebuchet. I want transparent backgrounds, and that should be fine. Next, I need my title. And it's going to start out formatted a little weird, and then we'll fix it. Make this a little bigger so you can see. I applied a style so that the flags and the text would be displayed all in one line, and then made the font red and big. And there's our title. I'm going to do another HTML viewer. And make that a little smaller, not that small. This one has a title. I used a little Unicode character there for volume. The next thing is our button. And for this, I used a new slicer. It is going to be single select, and it has to have one selected. Then I changed to a rounded rectangle, but I rounded my corners all the way to make them almost a circle. I need a single row for 2 buttons. So if we look at the, for the sake of time, formatted button, and we look at our callout values, the default is trebuchet 15 black. When we hover, it stays the same as far as text. When you press it, it stays the same. And then when it's selected, we change the font to white. I believe that I set a consistent border regardless of the state of the button. It is always 1 pixel, but the color changes. So if it's not selected, or it's only in the process of being selected, it is gray. When it's selected, it's black. It stays 1 pixel. It's not transparent. The fill changes. So by default, that was the button background measure that we put in. All of them use, all the states of this button use this for the fill. But default, the transparency is set to 50. Hover, the transparency is set to 30. Press is 20. Selected is 0. So that's why it looks like it gets darker or bolder when you select it. And then the transition steps when you hover and click. And I gave it a title that says to go. And I put little instructions in it so people know what to do. If you want to restart the race, you just hit stop and then hit go again. And that takes us to the main visualization, which is a Deneb visual, but it is sitting on top of an image. And the image is one that I created manually. Line it up there. So there's my start line in my image, and the checkered area is the finish line. I did this in Figma by just placing shapes. I made a frame, I put a yellow line, I put red and white lines, and then I made little rectangles that were alternating, and I copied and pasted them a bunch. You could have gone and found any image you wanted that looks like a racetrack. I did not want to find one that I did not want to spend time finding one that was free of copyright issues, so I just quickly made my own. Next, I'll add my Deneb visual. Get those lined up there. Send my image to the back, and then I need to populate my Deneb visual. Okay, I put quite a few things in here. It's important to note we want the index from the race car table. We've got our measures for last distance. We've got the base 64 image for the cars. info about the car, which ends up getting used. Well, the car number is used in the visual because I have it following the little car image, but the driver, lane, MPH is winner. No, sorry, winner and race time are all just tooltip information. And to make the cars move, I did a tricky thing in Deneb that I will show you in a second, but it required me to add time sex, the what if parameter table column, not the measure that gets automatically created. And I also needed to add button. So this expands my data set a little bit. So I won't have one row per car, and that's okay. It works out just fine. I did this entirely in Vega Lite, and I usually just tell it to use the Power BI theming. I'm just going to replace a couple things in here for the config. It was mostly about tick count, things like that. That will be different if you choose different data. Okay, I have pasted my JSON in here and I want to note a couple things. I changed the car number with a period at the end to remove the period, and I changed the time dash SECS to underscore to make my life easier in Deneb. It doesn't really matter, just the way you write datum and have to deal with quotes and stuff is more annoying if I don't change it, so I changed it. I'm going to go through this and explain each piece, but I'm going to do it in a slightly different order than what is presented. So we always have data set in here. This is controlling the size. I wanted it to auto size, meaning if I make my visual larger or smaller, it fits within it. We're going to ignore the params and transforms and start in layer. I have, I believe, 3 layers in here. The first one is the image layer. So you'll see really what I'm doing is using Deneb to create a scatter plot that happens to have race cars on it. So this image type, I've set the image height and width to 35 and I'm aligning it right, meaning the right edge of the image will be at the location we tell it to be. That way my cars are behind the starting line. So the x-axis will be whatever distance the car has moved. And I hard-coded the domain so I would have plenty of room for the cars to be behind the starting line and for them to end past the finish line and have a little star denoting the winners there. I titled my axis. I made a tick count of 5 so it wouldn't have a lot of dotted lines, but I did want a few so you could kind of tell where the car was within the race. The y-axis, I put the index field in here. And if you remember, the index field is just the unique identifier of the car within the race. So there were 16 cars in this round, therefore index will be 0 through 15. This one, because it's not a meaningful data point, I'm hiding all the labels. Domain is false, ticks are false, grid is false, all that. Then, because I'm using an image, we say the URL property is this field. That was my race car images converted to B64. And then I added a tooltip. And this is a Deneb tooltip versus a Power BI tooltip. Everything was in Deneb already, so this made sense to do this here. And it's just text. So I added the car number, the driver, the lane, the miles per hour, the race time, and then a true false winner column. And that was my first layer. The second layer is a text mark that I told it to use the same coordinates for X and Y axis, but I told it to move back 40 pixels. And it doesn't have a tooltip, and it's a size 12 font, but it's also right aligned. So it's basically following the car. The axis is the same here, so I did -100 to 1350 to give this and the car's room. It's again using the index. And the text that's actually there is just the car number. The last layer is also text, and I have it moving over to the right 5 pixels from the location, the coordinates that I give it. So it has no tooltip. It's left aligned. This one, instead of using the last distance for the x-axis, I'm using the end of track measure, which is the same for every row, 1330, because the race is 1320. My scale domain is up to 1350. This is the edge, basically. But I'm left aligning, so the left edge of my mark is on the 1330 spot. So I'm giving it the same axis name so it all lines up with the other layers, but it's actually using a different measure, which is end of track, to plot. And then again, using the index. And the text is my is winner measure, where it puts a little star if that car won its race, the head-to-head two-car race within this round. I forgot to set a relationship to make the car image work. So between race car and distance timing, we have a many-to-one relationship, distance timing to race car, on the index, which is correct. So that's the car. This one, the relationship is based on lane. Car image has unique lanes, race car does not. So it's one to many. And I'm making this a both in this case to make life easier. And that makes our race cars different colors. So this is our original plot. It's a little difficult to read here because our actual background is dark, whereas this preview background is light. That's okay. It will look fine in the end. Now I'm going to talk through the parameters and the transforms. Right now, I have a static visual. I could put a slicer for the time seconds and drag it across and you could watch the cars move, but I want the cars to move on their own. So enter the params. I have 2 parameters in here, and this is not well documented in Vegalite. I found this on a Stack Overflow post and copied it. But basically, this parameter is the time. And it has an input stream based on a timer that reevaluates every 100 milliseconds. And so it updates based on getting a new value of now. Then I have a parameter called start time, and it gets initialized to the value of now, but it doesn't get updated every 100 seconds. So this one happens once and stays static. Make that a little easier to read there. Then I had to make up a math equation to make my cars move in a somewhat timely manner, but slow enough that you would be able to see them. And on top of that, I needed them to start over. I didn't want the timer to just count forever and the cars would have reached the end of the race and that's it. So what I did was create this calculation. And it is the start time from when the visual was first rendered. The time is the current time. So time minus start time, how much time has elapsed? And I divided that by 100, took the floor, which is going to give you the integer floor, and then did a modulus 80. The modulus 80 is because I know that it took the slowest car slightly less than 8 seconds to complete the race. So this first part gives me whole numbers essentially, and I want it to count to 80 and then start over. And then divide that by 10, so I end up with something equal to the time seconds. So it will count 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, all the way to 8. And that is my time diff. I also have this current seconds thing that I was using really just to test so I could throw it in my tooltip and see it change all the time. You don't have to build this one. It's helpful as you're doing this so you can see what you're doing though. This one I needed. So I wanted my cars to go when the go button was pressed and to reset when the stop button was pressed. So I want them to go back to 0. So if the button value, this is the field button that I added to the visual, equals stop, then my distance, or my time rather, is going to be 0. Otherwise, I'm going to use whatever the value is returned by this time diff formula. Now that I have this, that's either the time elapsed with all the math formula or 0, I'm going to filter all of my data, that's my last transform here, and say I want the time underscore SECS value to be equal to this test one that I added. So it will filter the rows out and leave only the ones where these are equal. So when I do that, right now, my button is set to stop, which is why the cars stay at 0. You can see the cars look fine. You can read their car number on the dark background. When I switch to go, okay, so we can see my cars are placed so that the nose of the car is just where my background image has the start line. And then when I click go, they'll actually move. It takes them just a second. I'm going to hit stop and then they come back to the start line. There's my tooltip. And here's my finished product. You'll see the little stars when they get to the end, and it'll start over again until I hit stop. So that is it for Workout Wednesday 2024, week 41 for Power BI. This one was a more difficult one with some perhaps hidden features from Deneb. So thanks for hanging in there with me. I hope you had fun doing something a little bit out of the box. Thanks for watching.